Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with Mindrolling, and a wonderfully original, and a real Renaissance man, as far as I can tell, Federico Faggin. Federico, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm pleasure to meet you also,
Yeah.
if not personally.
This is it. This is the beauty of podcasts. You get to meet people and make friends, especially during the pandemic. It was really great because we couldn't even go out of our houses. So Federico has a wonderful book, Irreducible, Consciousness, Life, Computers, and Human Nature. It is chock full of extraordinary information. I have to admit, some of it flew over my head, to say the least, but some of it was right in the pocket of what I understand in terms of experience, day-to-day experience. So it's just amazing how much information is in this book, Federico. But so first thing is, how did you get there? Where you grew up in Italy, correct?
Yes.
Okay, what was that like, and what were those circumstances? I guess both familial as well as the culture that you were in. How did they affect you to have you grow into even any interest in consciousness?
Well, I was born in 1941, so as you can imagine, that was wartime.
Yeah.
And the U.S. had just entered the war shortly after my birth, December 7th. And then I was in Vicenza. Vicenza is near Venice in the northeast of Italy. And my father was a professor of philosophy and history in the classical lycée, which is the sort of the humanistic high school in Italy. Also a translator of the Enneads of Plotinus, and wrote about Schopenhauer, Master Eckhart, and so on in his life. Not in 1941, but later on. And but I was a mechanic. I only care about machines. I wanted to figure out how the machines work.
Even as a kid?
Even as a kid, even 4 or 5 years old. And when I was 1.5, my parents moved back into the village where they were coming from. Both came of a village that was less than 10 miles away from town, from Vicenza, for safety. And so we lived in my grandparents' on the father's side home. And basically, I spoke the dialect of the place. My parents also spoke the dialect of the place with each other. So, I was there 6 years, and that village, in the countryside. We were in the little town, but in the countryside, people were still using oxen.
Really?
Driven plows. I mean, in the where they kept many did not even have electricity in their home yet. So I mean, it was like people lived 200 years ago, and so that was quite an interesting growing.
No. Oh, listen, I have to interject, because when we take what you are describing and we put it in context of what you eventually, as an adult, accomplished, and Federico is a physicist. He was deeply involved in the early part of the creation of what happened and the efficacy of computers, around microprocessing and silicon gate technology, etc. So just everybody keep this in mind. We have the oxen who's pulling people around town, and then we jump forward to what you have done, and all the way up to right now, I'm sure, around artificial intelligence, which we'll get at. So I'm sorry I had to interrupt and just put the context in from where you were starting.
That's good, because I lived in the agricultural age
Yeah.
almost, right?
Yeah.
And then when I went back when I was 7 or so in town, back to Vicenza, then that was industrial age, and
Yeah.
uh, and then
That's
I
funny.
contributed quite a bit to the to the information age, which is the one that we are living now.
Hmm.
So that was quite interesting. I came in this country in 1968, and I have been in the Bay Area ever since.
Uh-huh.
So, but I studied physics at University of Padua, and I graduated in '65, and and then I worked for a few years in Italy, and then I came here. And my first job was the development of technology called MOS silicon gate that changed the way to make transistors and integrated circuits in a very important way. And it
Hmm.
was eventually adopted in the entire world. It made possible all the pieces to make a computer on a chip, on a little sliver, of silicon, single crystal silicon, the
Mm.
size of a nail, the pinky nail.
Yeah.
And so I did that at Intel in 1970, 71. Intel was born as a startup, and they took the technology that I developed as their fundamental technology. They took it from Fairchild, where I developed this technology. And so the first microprocessor, I designed the first 4 microprocessors of Intel, which were the first 4
Wow.
microprocessors in the world. And
Amazing.
then I started my own companies. I started with Zilog, where I developed the Z80 microprocessor, the first second generation microprocessor that became a bestseller, and is still in production today, 48 years later. So
Really? Wow.
yeah, and then I moved on to develop neural networks in my third company, Synaptics. And that's it. That was then that I encountered the problem of consciousness, because I was studying neuroscience, and the books on neuroscience were talking about electrical signals in the brain and biochemical signals and so on. And it looks like they were explaining what our brain does. But at one point, I asked myself, "But wait a second! When I feel love for a person, I feel I have feelings. I don't have electrical signals. How do I get feelings from electrical signals?" And I
Mm.
discovered what was called later the hard problem of consciousness, which is, how do you get an experience out of electrical signals, or, physical signals in a machine? Because the brain at that time, and still is, considered a machine, and like a computer. And so it was through this process that I started what I call my fourth life, that led me to an extraordinary experience of consciousness that revealed to me that consciousness was much, much more than what I thought when I started asking myself that question. And from there, my life was changed. And I started studying consciousness, and eventually, after 20 years of study, and of course, you study consciousness by experiencing. You don't study consciousness by reading books. You do that too, but that's
Mm.
the less important aspect of the study of consciousness. And so I eventually ended up deciding that I was going to spend the rest of my life. That was about 2008, 2009, studying consciousness and trying to connect spirituality and physics.
Mm.
In other words, connect the inner world of experience and meaning with the outer world of symbols and matter, in space and time,
Mm.
which, it was very clear to me that that was only the superficial aspect of reality, where the deeper aspect of reality is the meaning that we feel in a reality that at that point had to be quantum, but I didn't know how, but in which way. So if you want to do science, you need to understand exactly how the two meet, and then you have a new theory, which is what now exists. And I have created, with the help of one of the top 10 physicists in quantum information, in the world, which is a physicist in Italy, that
Oh, really?
showed that you can actually develop quantum physics from quantum information. So from quantum information, you can go to physics. So quantum information, in other words, information is even more important than on the physics, which is considered the ontology. So the ontology moves from the quantum fields to the quantum information. And then with him, we moved the ontology to the inner aspect of the quantum fields, where there is comprehension, meaning, and experience.
I want to ask about him in a bit, but can you? I mean, I know that experience, awakening experience you had a few decades ago, it was seminal in your life. Can you really go through it and tell us what happened?
Yeah, I can do it as you know. I'm often asked if I feel like I'm always
Oh,
repeating, but anyway, yeah. So
we're fresh
basically,
ears. So,
yeah. I was in Lake Tahoe at that time with the family during the Christmas holidays, and as a background, I was not happy. And I had been unhappy for many years since I reached all the all the objectives that I thought would have made me happy. Beautiful family, everybody happy, everybody healthy, and more money than I needed to spend the rest of my life, that I could spend, and reasonably famous in the within the community in which I was working. But I was unhappy, and I didn't know why. How could I not be happy having achieved all of this? And of course, it was a problem of consciousness, and that was at the time when I was trying to program a computer to be conscious, because after I recognized that consciousness was not included in the discussion of the neuroscientist, I told myself, well, then if science is correct, I should be able to program a computer to be conscious, because if the brain is a machine and a computer is an informational machine, consciousness should come out of it. And I couldn't, I spent about 2 years, trying to, my spare time, trying to figure out how. I couldn't. There is nothing in physics that tells you how you convert electrical signals in feelings, in what philosophers call qualia. And so in this milieu, and I also recognized that I was pretending to be happy. They were here, for years I was pretending to be happy because I was a successful man, and so I had to play the game. I was running a company. I had many hundreds of people working for me. Come on, you had to be on top, right? Show that who you are, man.
yeah.
And that if you are successful too, you will be happy. Well. But probably a year before that, probably a year before, I put my foot down, basically, metaphorically, when I was thinking about, which I did occasionally, my inner state. And I said, no, I'm not happy, and I want to understand. I really want to understand why I'm not happy. And so I was intense in wanting to understand. And I think that was a sort of prayer that brought in, this experience that happened one night during the Christmas holidays. And I woke up at midnight. I was thirsty. I went get a glass of water in the kitchen, went back to bed, and just, in this type of just thinking nothing, try to desire, just wanted to go back to sleep. And all of a sudden from my chest, a beam of energy. It was physical energy. It was felt like physical energy coming from me. And it is white scintillating light. And, it comes out rushing. And it feels like love, but it's a love so powerful that I never felt anything like that before. But it's also mixed with joy and with a sense of peace. The peace is, I never felt peace before. I was, peace was, that's me. I'm home. This is me, because my consciousness was in that beam of light, and so and what was, I was, like stunned, because how can anything like this, love in particular, come out of me? You seek love out there, but how can it come out of you? So
Yeah.
so it was, I was just, just living this, and all of a sudden this energy explodes, and is everywhere, the same white scintillating light, and my consciousness is in this energy. So I'm observing myself, because my consciousness is what observes, and my consciousness is also out of my body, is in my body and out of my body. So wow. And so so all of a sudden my mind caught a glimpse of a thought, and the thought, and so transformed that thought into mental words, and the mental words said, "Oh wow, this is the stuff of which everything in the universe is made of," and the sense that I was the observer of myself, and I had the same point of view that I've always had. So I was observing myself with my point of view that I had since I remember having a point of view. And so it's all of a sudden, I'm there, and then that's it. This vanish, and I'm back to myself, with the normal, my normal way of, being. And so I stood there, for, I don't know how long I stood there, just kind of stunned. But
I bet.
eventually this changed my life, because just already from the next day it was clear that what my sense of me that was separate from the rest of the world, now I was the world observing itself. I mean, this is a mind-boggling perception, but this perception brought a sense of truth. Now I call it a direct experience of consciousness. Not the indirect, where you read a book and you think that you understand what the author of the book is saying. This one, because you experience it. And in a sense, you become what you experience. And so it's like when a child plays and he gets lost in this game, and he kind of, it's the game. It becomes the game. That experience. Now I can remember that I had similar experiences when I was a child, but of course they were ordinary, in the sense that it was nothing extraordinary what my experience was, but I was losing myself in that experience. So this way of direct experiencing is the way we know. And to me, that the sense of truth that was in that experience was stronger than the sense of truth that I was getting when I proved a theorem, mathematical theorem. Because in science, the only way to be not certain, but be close to the truth, is that you prove a theorem. But you always start in mathematics with some postulates that are taken to be truth, because we all agree that they have to be true. Yeah. So you don't start by knowing the truth. You start by assuming that something is true, and you use that truth to prove the theorems logically, through a logical process. So anyway, so that threw me into a 20-year period where I studied consciousness. I began. My first step was to find a transpersonal psychologist to discuss this thing, trying to get a sense of what was going on.
Did you turn to the East at all, Federico? Did you turn at all to the wisdom of the East? Like we did. Many of us went to India and all that.
That psychology turned me into some books and things of the sort, and but most importantly, then I was beginning to do meditation. All this stuff that allowed me little by little to get into and also writing what I was experiencing, and because after that experience, I was dreaming a lot more. Many of my dreams were very vivid. I mean, there was clearly I was in a role to, to experience myself and know myself in a way. And so I had many other experiences throughout. In those 20 years, I had well over 100 experiences that I would qualify as extraordinary, and but none the same.
None the
So,
same.
or very few were, repetitious. For example, in some cases, I went out of body. For example, the out of body experience, and it happened three times, and so in that case, that was a repetition of something, but the experience were different each, and so. Anyway, so after that period, it was clear that consciousness and free will had to be fundamental at such a level that I decided to stop everything I was doing, sell my last company, get out of all the boards that I was, and just to dedicate
Really?
myself to
Wow.
the study of consciousness with the intention to bringing science and spirituality together. Because at that point, I had such a taste of spirituality, the fact that we know through those experiences, and that knowledge is not the knowledge that you have reading a book. It's different. It's
Yeah.
and it's deeper, and so there has to be more. And this is connected with the quantum nature of the universe, which, of course, even the fathers of quantum physics had perceived, this sort of compatibility between quantum physics and the properties of consciousness, where instead there is no compatibility between the properties of consciousness and classical physics, the physics of the deterministic world, because in a deterministic world you don't have free will, and if you don't have free will, what is consciousness good for? If you don't, you know what you want because you're conscious, but you don't have free will, so you can do nothing about knowing what you want.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, the description of this, I would call it a journey that you went on when you went to get the glass of water. I mean, it rings so much. I mean, I think of Ram Dass's journey with psilocybin. The same thing happened, basically.
Yeah.
And then he was witnessing himself from outside his body, in his body. I mean, he was like, whoa, that was just extraordinary for him. So, psychedelics, of course, give people that journey, very much similar, the interconnectedness of everything, the fact that love and its quality is what the foundation of everything is, and so on. You get that through psychedelics. Has that been part of your experimentations at all?
No, it's not.
No. Okay.
No. I think that I believe that you don't know what psychedelics do, so I prefer something that happens naturally, because then I know that I was healthy before. I didn't, though I have, more recently I have many experiences with holotropic breath work. That holotropic breath work is simply, a rhythmic breathing, and there is no substance is used.
Do you know of Stan Grof then?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, let me say that in relation to this, we talked about, that you knew who Ram Dass was, of course, and I wonder, are you familiar with his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, the man in the blanket? There's a picture of him in Be Here Now. So when Ram Dass started talking about his experience in India when he came back with this being, he went to India because I keep coming down from psychedelics. I mean, he took gigantic over years, a lot. Yeah. I want to find a map of consciousness, is what he said to himself. So he thought he would go to India to find it. And he ended up with this being named Neem Karoli Baba, who we, many Westerners, ended up in India when Ram Dass went back the second time because they had heard him talk, like me.
Yeah.
We heard him speak about this being. In a way, Ram Dass was, shall we say, there was a tremendous trust we had, trust in his heartfulness and so on, trust in the way he didn't fool himself about his foibles and all of that. And so we ended up there with a being that immediately broke all of our minds by demonstrating that he knew everything about our past, present, and future. In India, it's called Antarayami, a knower of all hearts. This being was no longer in duality. There was no polarity. He never taught. He didn't give lectures. There's no books. There's no nothing. There's whatever we brought back, which was really very, very basically around love everyone, serve everyone, and remember the divine. That was the only instructions. That's the name of the foundation that we have representing all of these teachings.
Yeah.
But more to the point, Ram Dass gave Neem Karoli Baba some very intense doses. He asked for them. Do you have any of that medicine? Ram Dass said, yeah. You need some aspirin or something? He said, no, the yogi medicine. Oh, acid? Really? And twice he took very large doses. Nothing happened. But he did say, this is good for beginners. You get to stay 2 hours with Christ, and then you have to leave. Yeah. Eventually, better to feed people, love and feed people. So this is what Ram Dass took back after he had those experiences, and the reality of what psychedelics has done, of course, for many people in the West. I think has been a really important in our modern evolution. I know now there's a psychedelic revolution, with the way that it can help PTSD and so on and so forth, different elements of it. But the main thing that I'm sharing this with you, the main thing that he spoke to us that was core to everything, he would hold up his finger and go, in Hindi, sub ek, all one. There's only one. Yeah. And I noticed that in your book. You speak to it as well as a foundation.
Also, the Vedas say the same thing.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Most of the traditions, spiritual tradition, and the philosophy, the foundations of many philosophies are all about oneness of the universe. And of course, quantum physics says that one, but not the universe, not one for them, but the universe, the physical universe, is holistic and dynamic. So here you are. You already have the physical, the essence of the physicality of the universe is in quantum physics. It is holistic, means that it's not made of parts that can be separated. Everything is interconnected within the universe. But of course, when you have extraordinary experience of consciousness, then that connectedness, has a completely different meaning than just knowing that there is some kind of connection from the physical point of view. And, the connection from the physical point of view is that the particles, the elementary particles like electrons, protons are not elementary particles, but they are fundamental particles because but anyway, those particles are states of fields. They are not objects separate from the field. So they are like waves on the sea, and you cannot remove the wave from the sea. And in fact, the properties of the wave are the properties of the sea. They're not the properties of the waves.
Right.
If we don't see the sea, we attribute properties to the waves because we only see the waves, or we think that there is only the waves. But in the in quantum physics, the particles cannot be separated from the field. And so the properties of the particles are properties of the field that we measure when these particles manifest in space and time. So we call the state an excited state, when the state that you could describe without measuring, but when you test that, you have these quantum fields interacting with the instrument with which you do the measurement, and a particle appears in this interaction, which they gets amplified by the instrument to a signal, like a an instrument that, with, what do you call it, the thing to move, right, in the instrument, or a light that goes on, or whatever, some sort of signal which is shareable, because no one can see the actual particle. The particle, is manifested in the interaction, and then gets that event gets amplified and produces a classical signals that people can see. So that's how we know what's going on. We don't know what's going on, in the details, but we know, because the problem of measurement has never been solved completely. So, but we know that there is stuff that must exist in a deeper reality, that when it manifests in physical, in space and time, and we can actually see it and share that knowledge. But that symbolic knowledge is not what happens within the field. And there are properties of the field, like entanglement, for example, which is a pure quantum property that doesn't exist in the space and time, in the object of space and time.
This is the kind of atmosphere that you're describing, sitting with this man in India in the blanket. This is beyond space and time. He actually, people witness him in so many miraculous kind of situations in terms of space and time and going beyond it. So, which leads me to bring up free will.
Yeah.
So, a quote, you quote Nehru, actually: "Life is like a card game. The hand you are dealt represents determinism. The way you play it is free will." Okay, that's a great quote. So, I'm not sure which way to go first. I think it'd be great if you gave us an idea, and this is very core in your book here, of how you see free will situated in the reality of our lives.
Yeah. Well, in order to explain that, I have to start with the arrival point, which is a postulate that then you use to then do the rest, and that's the typical. First you kind of fumble around trying to figure it out. Then you say, no, this stuff I have to start with the postulate. Then you logically derive the rest, and that's pretty much the process that I follow for the 15 years or so that followed the decision to start to develop this theory. And so in fact the final step was taken about 6 months ago. So where basically I said, okay, we start with the postulate. The postulate, I call it the postulate of being, and this postulate of being simply says that
being,
one,
right? You're saying
being, yes, essere
B-E-I-N-G.
in Italian, the being.
Essere.
Yeah, that is the word essere is it's like being, but it's got a deeper sense of the interiority of being, except of the exteriority of being. Not a thing. Essere, Anyway, the postulate is very simple and self-evident, especially to the people that we are talking to. So one, the totality of what exists is dynamic and holistic. I've already mentioned that simply defines the physical universe from physicists, but wants to know itself. So I added the want to know itself. And the wanting to know itself introducing the wanting, which is will, free will, and the knowing, which requires consciousness. So consciousness is what knows within one. So the capacity to know is what we call consciousness. You can define it scientifically as consciousness is the capacity to know itself. So you may say there may be awareness, there would be a capacity to know without even knowing that there is a self. But that's kind of, but awareness is not disconnected from consciousness. See, when you go at that level of being, in the foundational level, when one being holistic is one, meaning it's not made of separable parts. There is nothing that you can take apart. And consider that by taking it apart, you're not change what is. So we all exist within one. Everything exists within one because one is holistic. So in fact, the idea, the core idea of oneness is, I don't think, has ever been explored scientifically because science works by reductionism. They have to separate things, and you have to say, okay, suppose that this doesn't interact with anything else, but we know that things interact with everything else. So but we have to say, but if we can separate, if we can isolate this thing, then we can describe it. But if you cannot isolate it, you cannot describe it because it's connected with everything. But then they forget that they have isolated something, and then they talk as if things were actually isolated, which is not true.
That's funny.
So we start with this postulate, and this postulate now says consciousness and free will exist. They have to be defined more, especially free will, and which is your question. But consciousness and free will exist. Now, what do we get if we start there? We get that we explain why quantum physics has the properties that it has. Nobody has been, the physicists are saying, they all are saying, we do not understand quantum physics. We do not understand quantum physics. And what is it that we don't understand about quantum physics? The superposition of states, the fact that particles behaves like, particles and waves, it's explained that way, but it's not a correct explanation because there are no particles. I said earlier, the particles are states of fields. The foundational, for physics, the foundation of all reality are the quantum fields. The ontology is in the quantum fields, but the quantum fields are not conscious. They have no free will. They are material things. But the quantum fields are holistic. So all of us, they interact with each other. So, all this interaction with each other, the fields, is telling you that everything is interconnected because they interact with each other. So there is this, this capacity, this holism forces, is forcing us to go beyond what so far science has done, which is to understand that when you are down at that level, when you speak of holistic properties, like, for example, consciousness and free will, those two aspects are not separable. You cannot take free will and consider it independent of consciousness. In fact, free will and consciousness must work together because, as I said earlier, one without the other doesn't make any sense. If one wants to know itself, which is the postulate, so whatever happens is toward the purpose of one knowing itself. So you have to have free will. You have to. What does it mean? You have to be able to direct your own self-knowing. Because otherwise it's a mechanism that makes you know yourself. That doesn't make any sense. And consciousness is the one that allows you to know. Also to experience your own self-knowing, so know what you know, and also can tell you that you don't know, that there is something that you don't know. For example, how is do you think that a computer knows that it knows and knows that it doesn't know? No way. Okay, but we, for example, especially for very subtle feelings like love, for example, the love that you feel, it has dimensions that go so deep that you can only observe or get a sense of it up to a point, but then there is all kinds of stuff down there that you don't know. So you know that you don't know, but this motivates you to find out. So in this sense, the fact that that we know with things that are not numbers. Numbers are, very definite. 7, 12, the square root of 2, whatever numbers is very definite. Now, the imaginary number, is not so definite because there are no two numbers that multiply by itself give you -1. So we have a little, a little crazy stuff, happening. But we deal with that by operationally. Of course, it's it's good operationally. It helps us, but in fact, there is a little mystery there. How can you call a number something which is which is not, that cannot be made by any kind of combination of numbers other than say, okay, it's got to exist, the square root of -1, and I call it I, and then you go for it. And operationally is very helpful. But anyway, I don't want to go by the tangent here, but the point is that the free will at our level is something that we have to have in order to know ourselves. And of course, we are constrained by the body that exists in a physical reality that follows the rules of classical physics and quantum physics, mostly at the macroscopic level, mostly quantum physics, classical physics. And so, we can only, there is only a limited freedom that we have while we are incarnated. But despite that, we can actually decide, for example, where to look, where to get information and convert that information into meaning, into inner meaning. The inner meaning is not in the body, is in the field that controls the body. So already you have to think in terms of 3 levels of reality here in this theory. So a vector with many numbers, separate direction. Each number defines a direction, a dimension in this space. But these dimensions, these numbers, are actually complex numbers. A complex number is a real number plus an imaginary number. So they're not the same numbers as the one that you would use to describe things, even in an n-dimensional real space. So you already see that this thing that we call quantum state is not something that we can imagine. We can deal with it mathematically, but we cannot imagine what it really means. In fact, its meaning is defined, not defined, but is imagined as a probability amplitude. A probability amplitude. What is a probability amplitude? Well, is a complex number that multiplied by its complex conjugate gives you a probability. Okay. So, but I don't want to get there. But it is basically it is a state that while it is, from the point of view of mathematics, a very definite state, because it's a vector, is a definite state, a vector that evolves with with a certain law, which are laws of physics, evolves in time, and that evolution is actually considered possible only the evolution which is called deterministic. But it is the deterministic evolution of a probability. It's not a deterministic evolution of a real physical variable. So here we have already a disconnect in quantum theory with classical theory that describes only things that moves in space and time, of which the stuff that you measure, and you describe the stuff that you measure, not the probability of what you will measure, the stuff that you measure directly. So in a classical particle, the position and the velocity, or it's called momentum when you multiply by its mass, but position and momentum as this particle moves in space and time, and you can compute completely the trajectory. of this particle, classical particle. For a quantum particle, which is a state of a field, you cannot do that. You cannot know simultaneously position and velocity or momentum with arbitrary precision. You can only know one. Typically, when you make a measurement, you set up the measurement instrument to measure one or the other because the type of measurement are different. And if you measure one with certain precision, the other one cannot be known. It's impossible.
I'm going to take this into a different area that we'll see how you react to it when we're talking about free will. Yeah. You've gone through a lot of science here around it, and that which is beyond science. You're talking about the free will. What struck me is the ability, once you have experiences and realizations, and then you have free will to pursue those ideas, to pursue the conundrum, shall we say. Who am I? Start there, right? So,
On the other hand, I was trying to provide the theory that allows to see why, then, having accepted as a postulate that there is free will, then you can explain two crazy things about quantum physics that cannot be explained otherwise. One is what is called the collapse of the wave function. That is, that when you make a measurement, that quantum physics only tells you the probabilities of what you might measure. It doesn't tell you what you will measure. And so there is a piece of this science of physics that is not mathematical at all. And it is the collapse of the wave function, because you go from knowing all that you can possibly know in terms of probability, and then when you make a measurement, you measure only one of those possible states of which you know the probability. You see? So how does it work? What is that? In this new theory, that is a decision of free will of the field that you are observing. So let's say you are observing an electron, and the electron does not have a trajectory in space and time. You can only compute this quantum state, which is not in space and time. Then if you want to make a measurement of the position of this vector, which you then do in a proper instrument, you have to transform this quantum state into a possible positions of which you can know the probabilities. But it can only, so the computation only tells you where you can find the particles and the probability. But then when you make when the measurement happens, there is no rule other than it will be random, but it is controlled by the probability. So if you repeat the experiment n times, the probability can allow you to approximate what you're going, what you're going to see. But if you make the measurement one time only, you cannot tell where the next state is going to be. And the only way to explain that is to say that decision, because that is purely random. According to physicists, is a purely random event. And myself and this professor of physics who created this theory, we are saying, no, that's a free will decision of the field of electrons that has decided what to manifest. You see, so from the outside, it looks like a random event, but from the inside, from the field, that was a free will decision.
Yeah,
I know what I'm going to do. From the outside, you don't know.
Yeah, so, I want to give you an example of something. Maybe this is so far afield, given what you've just gone into. But I'm going to say it anyhow. I was pulled to go to India. I had no idea. I was unhappy. I knew that.
Yeah.
I was pulled over several years through different experiences. I was pulled to go to India to meet this being, through
Yeah.
Ramdas. Okay. And when I did the experience you described early in this conversation, that out of body experience, or that experience of total envelopment in the fabric of the universe, one could say love, I and everyone, all the other Westerners who went there had that experience, and we called it the same thing that you called it, which was home. Okay, that's the best word, because it's ineffable to describe this kind of love beyond any kind of transaction. You know, a love that is serving you exactly in the way that you needed to be served, which is what you just said about the electrons decide.
Not the
Right?
electron,
And
the field of electron.
the field of electron, and then
Yes.
you're pulled into it. So,
Yeah.
so that just sets the stage. That was our experience going to India to meet a being that was beyond polarization, beyond duality, was living in that field that you're really describing in different ways.
Yeah.
And
So
then,
it,
when
yeah.
I have to tell you the rest. One day, Ramdas, he was just thinking, God, there's in our tradition, it's called grace. You could call it some form of consciousness. The electron field is the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that. And then there's us as humans dealing, with karma and dealing with action, right? Like from the Bhagavad Gita. So he felt, how could there be any difference between these two things? Ramdas. So he went to Neem Karoli Baba and he said, aren't they the same? Consciousness, I mean, in your terms, more consciousness and action, free will. And he said, I'm not talking about this in public. Okay, that's what he said. I mean, this is an enigmatic being that did and said things that you wouldn't expect. So Ramdas went back into the room, and about an hour later, the interpreter came to him and said, Maharaji has a message for you. And it is that, tell Ramdas that he and I understand each other very well. Ramdas took that to mean absolutely they were indivisible. There's only one thing. These two things were indivisible. And in reality, we acted as if there is free will, because that's part of this incarnation, is to pursue who we truly are, reflecting, but we're reflecting as you described earlier. And so I don't know if this has any meaning to you whatsoever. I even, for years later, corroborated this with an extraordinary being who was very close to Neem Karoli Baba, our Indian mother. Siddhi Ma was her name. And she said, yes, they are indivisible, but you got to act in the way that you got to act as if there is free will.
Yeah, look, I look at it this way, all right? So in some ways, I can get exactly to what you said, but it's more nuanced because, when you do science,
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here it is. Imagine you are driving a car, right? You drive a car, and you are a conscious being that controls the body. So the body drives the car, and the body has learned to drive the car. So consciousness watch what the body does, may or may not intervene on what the body does. So when consciousness does not intervene, doesn't mean that you are not conscious. You're simply conscious. Let the body run its own program. And so while the body runs its own program, so to speak, that's predictable. You can predict the behavior, your behavior, even if you are conscious. because you're not acting on what the mechanism is doing, which is your body. But suppose that there is an extraordinary situation, and your consciousness, which is watching, I need to intervene. So in that moment, consciousness is intervening and exercises free will. That action of free will is a creation that cannot be predicted. You see, that is an actual, you can never predict that.
Or the
If we
bhaktis, we
were
call
only
it.
a machine, this will not be predictable.
Or
Okay?
they would call it, Federico, in the East, they
Yeah.
would call it grace.
Yeah. But now let me tell you where I converge with what you're saying. Suppose that you live in an environment that doesn't have all these constraints and so on, and you are a very advanced being, then if you are so advanced that you can watch what you're doing and you almost never intervene, let's say you never intervene, well, then you're still conscious, but you are actually acting as if you never act against your self-knowing. You see, they are not. So it looks like you don't have free will, because you never act by changing what your nature, the way you have developed your nature is actually doing. But you could, if something goes wrong. But if nothing goes wrong, well, you keep on going on without, with something that
That's the
appears to be.
question. The question is the you. Who's the you could? And
But
how
the
is
you is
that?
always the field. The you is never the body.
Yeah. So to me, the field is part of consciousness, right? I mean,
Of course, no, it's not.
nothing.
Yeah, it is the what I call the monad, what I call the sati in my book, is basically it is a part whole of one. In other words, when one knows itself in a specific direction for the first time, it knows itself as such. It brings into existence what it knows. That's a monad. That's a consciousness unit. That's a field that has all the characteristic of one, because one, when it sees itself, must see itself completely in that direction, for the point of view, with that perspective in which it looks at itself. So by knowing itself directly, it has created a whole, but because it is in a special point of view, is also a part, because it has many points of view with which it can know itself. And so that's why we are parts whole of one. But the concept of part whole is not a concept of physics, because but in a sense is the particle wave, right? The part, but the particle waves that cannot be separated.
Is your partner in Italy?
He's in Italy, yes. His name is Giacomo Mauro Dariano. He's professor of theoretical physics at the University of Pavia, near Milan.
And so as a physicist, he and you are absolutely moving, shall we say, a little bit of a new direction where science and quantum physics can maybe take another look at themselves regarding what I would call the mystery is still part of this whole deal.
Oh, of course.
The mystery,
and the mystery will never be resolved.
Right.
Because the way I'm thinking is that one wants to know itself, but the more he knows, the more he has to know. He will, because that's the way it works for us as well. The more you know, the more new connections can possibly be. So there is an explosion of self-knowing that will never end. And so there is going from a potentiality to an actuality which is exploding, is going faster and faster.
Yeah, well, that's why, I do honestly believe Neem Karoli Baba, who we met in India, had gotten to that level of human potential and actuality that is very rare, but set all of us in a direction to know ourselves at least a little bit more, if not a lot more, over many decades. And so, yeah, I have seen it with my own eyes that potentiality can become actuality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we are all called to do that on our own, in a sense, with help from others. But ultimately, the freeing ourselves, each of us has to do it within ourselves. We cannot have somebody do it for us. That's what I'm trying to say.
But that's what the Buddha said too.
Yeah. No, I mean, many of the things that I say, many others have said before. So I'm not claiming uniqueness here. I'm simply, telling you what I have found out, and generally what I found out through experiencing, but mostly through experiences, less by reading books. But many times when I read books, I find that other people have found out the same thing, which is
it's a reflection,
beautiful.
which is what we're talking about.
Absolutely beautiful, because he simply underscores what I'm saying. But
here's the book, everybody, and you'll see it because if you're on YouTube, Federico Faggin, Irreducible. And as you have been listening to the podcast, realize there's tremendous thought that has gone into this work, tremendous experimentation, tremendous experience, and it's one hell of a book, Federico.
Thanks.
And I thank you for being here and sharing it with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We will, in the show notes, everybody, we will absolutely give you a link so you can order the book, and also to Federico's website. And there's all sorts of extraordinary links there in terms of the work that he's been describing a little bit here. So you can take advantage of that. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And everybody, we'll see you next week on Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com. And have you ever heard of Krishnamurti?
Yes.
Yeah, he's one of our podcasts.
Oh, great.
Krishnamurti, Alan Watts. Yeah, it's we have an amazing.
Alan Watts as well.
Yeah, he's great too and fun. So we'll see you all next week, and thanks again. Thank you, Federico.
Thank you.